So we've talked in videos about like starting conversations about ground rules. We've talked about check-ins, all that kind of stuff. Part of the magic of facilitation is when the agenda is well constructed, but when it just flows, you know, when everything just kind of fits together seamlessly, Svein Are. I think about that session where it's almost hard to put your finger on it, but you know it when it feels like, oh, it just pulled off wonderfully. Do you have a view of what's underneath the hood that actually makes that happen?
Probably a lot of planning.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that planning is setting up, what do you call it, Steve? Setting up the space. Even though, so in a physical world, we know how to do that. We use the walls, we have 5 tables, we have stuff there. What do you do in the virtual space, in the virtual environment to ensure that you get that flow, that feeling of that it fits well together?
For me, it's you break down the purpose of what you're doing into kind of like the mathematics of what you need to do. So if the purpose is to get an action plan, well, we're going to need to work out, well, what could we do?
Yeah.
What's the best thing to do? Let's choose those best things. Let's make sure they're well written, and let's get a person to do those, and let's find an output for it. Or whatever. So, and in the physical world, so that's working in time, or you might be working in parallel. You might say, well, there are 2 questions to talk about. What are our strengths internally? What are our strengths externally, maybe, you know, or different things that we can share and then bring back together.
I have a small theory forming now. When we first really went into the digital space doing facilitation, there was a bit of a panic. Do you remember? Way back when? And oh gosh, what are we going to do? And then we started to get a hang of it, and we started to use more and more complicated applications and systems and design to do stuff. And I think that we kind of went up on a top here. I think we're coming back down, simplifying, discovering that, well, we can do this, and we can do it with simple tools. Designing spaces with, for instance, PowerPoint or even Excel.
Mm-hmm. The things that people know how to use might be easier to use for someone who's only got one screen than trying to juggle lots of stuff. And for me, there's that thoughtfulness in how you put together that kind of check-in introduction and balance the goal with the number of people and the time to do it, but also having those thoughts about that as a facilitator, to have a kind of maybe a challenging conversation with the person who you're working with, or you're commissioning this, to say, well, this is what we can probably do with that time, so that things are kind of realistic. And I'm minded of a workshop that someone described that didn't go well, where there was 15 people in there for an hour. And I wonder actually if they decided to have, well, let's have 3 1-hour sessions with 5 people, it might just have been a little bit better to get around that. And I think, I mean, I miss the face-to-face stuff. I miss the physicality of the feeling of when you cross off a post-it note or something. But in the digital space, we can play around with time and the way that people contribute much more, you know, rather than just write on a blank flip chart. You can say, well, here's a pre-populated spreadsheet, fill in those bits. What does it mean? We can actually look at the software itself, look at the thing that we're doing in a way.
So there's some possibilities open there, but what we're talking about now is, again, design in relation to goal and methods. And what we started out with is that it's worth putting careful consideration into how do we actually set this up.